Welcome to Argumentative Indians, a platform for honest debates. Should India reassess its one China policy? That's what we are here to discuss today. We are very fortunate to have a panel of India's most eminent diplomats and national security experts. I'm honored to introduce this panel. We have with us today Manjeev Singh Puri, who's and United Nations, as well as Nepal. He was a key member of India's delegation at various national climate change negotiations. He has served as Joint Secretary and Deputy Chief of Protocol in India's Foreign Ministry. Currently, he is on the advisory board of the Energy and Resource Institute. We have Major General SB Asthana, who is a strategic and security analyst. He's a veteran infantry general with 40 years of experience in national and international fields, a globally acknowledged strategic and military writer, analyst with over 400 publications. Currently, he serves as the chief instructor at USI, the oldest think tank in India. We have Bharat Karnad, who's an Emeritus professor for National Security Studies, Center for Policy Research, and a distinguished fellow also at USI. He was a member of National Security Advisory Board, National Security Council, Government of India. He's the author of several acclaimed books and a widely followed blog on India's foreign policy. We have Jayadeva Ranade, who's a security and intelligence expert. Formerly, he was in the Cabinet Secretariat of the Government of India. He's a seasoned China analyst with over 25 years of experience. He's presently a distinguished fellow with the Center for Air Power Studies. We have Shruti Pandalai, who's a strategic affairs expert tracking India's foreign and security policy. She works on projects that focus on evolving geopolitics in Asia Pacific. Formerly, she has worked as international affairs broadcast journalist, news anchor, and senior correspondent. Welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us today. So to kickstart, can I invite Mr. Ranade to give us a brief historical context of India's One China policy? Why and how did it come about?
Well, it's a very relevant question today, especially when we see that China doesn't seem to care about agreements or treaties and flouts them at will. But let me try and frame your question in a bit of a context for the wider discussion and lead off from what our former External Affairs Minister, the late Ms. Sushma Swaraj, told the then visiting Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi that, you know, if you want us to have a one China policy, you should have a one India policy. And I think that reflected, you know, what her problem with the China policy, and it would have been rankling her for a long, long time. Let's go back a bit, and I'll take three specific issues just to suggest why we have delayed discussing and acting on this question of yours, and what we need to do. The first is when we began the process of recognizing China, the People's Republic of China, at that time itself, in my view, we did not take a firm enough position on asserting our, at that time, if I may say, inherited rights and privileges in Tibet. We had a consul general in Tibet. We had certain properties there. We had an escort there of the army. And we gave up all of them at Chinese urging, only so that the process of recognizing the People's Republic of China moves ahead. You will appreciate the irony of this. A country which has just become independent should be seeking recognition from as many countries as it can. But here you have a country which is already independent, which is already recognized, wanting to recognize such a country and yet having to go through this painful process of negotiation. And at that time, and I'm talking about the 1950s, at that time, we did not address the boundary issue or the border issue which of course was to become the single dominant aspect of India-China relations. Because for the first time, we now have had a border with China, while earlier we had a border with Tibet. The second point I'd like to make is that of Kashmir. I think it's come up again yesterday with the Pakistan foreign minister's visit to Beijing. A joint statement was signed where again they have mentioned Kashmir. And this is not the first time. So let me just give you three fact points very, very briefly. One is till 1962, the Chinese position on Kashmir was neutral or in our favor. In fact, when the Secretary General of our Ministry of External Affairs at that time asked Chow En-lai, who was visiting here at that time, about China's stance on Kashmir, his response was, show me a single place where we have not said that Kashmir is a part of India. That was then. After 1962, of course, there was a shift in China's position, and they then, at times, when they wanted to improve ties with us, introduced a degree of ambiguity which lingered on the subject. But when China operationalized the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor in April 2015 as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, since then, when they announced at that point in time $64 billion, now 52, investment in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or proposed investment, the situation changed. Obviously, because of that investment, they de facto recognized and in a sense legitimized Pakistan's occupation of POK, Gilgit, Baltistan, Azad Kashmir, etc. So that was the second aspect. I'm not even talking about the stapled visas that they began issuing in 2010, starting with then Army commander who was due to visit. That hasn't been sorted out even till today. And the third issue is that of Taiwan. I agree that we cannot have full diplomatic relations with Taiwan till Taiwan, changes its stance on borders. Because today, their territorial boundaries, as they see it, are identical with that of the People's Republic of China. So obviously, that's something we cannot accept. But there is a lot of trade, there's a lot of commerce, there's a lot of cooperation on technical aspects that the Taiwanese and we can do, which we are missing out on to our cost, to our detriment. And just because we are nervous or apprehensive about how China will react, I think when China can interact with the Taiwanese, when they can, in fact, even meet the Taiwanese president, then why cannot we send our ministers and secretaries down there to have collaborative agreements? So these are 3 points that I would put out here right in the beginning. And obviously, each one of them buttresses an argument that we should insist on a one China policy, and that one China policy will be strictly reciprocal. How you treat us is how we shall treat you. So starting with all the 3 issues that I mentioned, we should make it clear, in fact, in action and in pronouncement, that we don't consider them as part of Chinese territory at all.
Thank you, sir. So you brought up the reciprocity points, that although we sort of respect the one China, we don't find that sort of reciprocity on the other side. But the one China is sort of like a sacrosanct line, and not just India, the whole international community has sort of treated as a sacrosanct line that nobody crosses at the risk of irking China. But even to discuss this, should India not be discussing, like if we are saying that if we respect their things, but they should respect us, but there's really no risk, right? Because it's considered such a sacred line that we don't even discuss whether or not we should have relations with Taiwan. We don't even get into those discussions. So what is the reason behind India's timidity on this matter?
Yaju calls it a red light. The Chinese call it a red light. as far as we are concerned, in international politics, everything changes. And as you know, there are a lot of issues about Tibet. Whether China really has sovereignty over Tibet or not, did have sovereignty over Tibet or not. These are big issues. The Taiwanese themselves say that we are Taiwanese, we've got nothing to do with China. And let's not forget the fact that in May last year, the Chinese asserted their claim, which they had been saying earlier, but this time physically, over Ladakh. And their foreign minister repeated it on 15th of June after Galwan, saying that Ladakh is China's sovereign territory. So how long are we going to continue with this, diffident policy towards the Chinese? I think that's the term. We have been timid right from the beginning. I mentioned to you about our negotiation with the Chinese on Chinese recognition. Since then, we can trace a long history. And even now, there are many other instances I can quote, but I'm sure others will do a better job. So let me just stop and say that there are no red lines in international politics. There are no red lines when it comes to a question of your sovereignty and your territorial integrity. I'll stop.
Thank you, sir. I want to bring in Mr. Puri because he seemed to disagree a little bit when you brought up Ladakh and Tibet. I think that sort of, so can you also explain to us a little bit of the China's five-finger policy, which is now the risk? A lot of people think that China might be reviving the five-finger policy, which brings to risk not just Ladakh, but also Arunachal Pradesh.
Yajur, thank you very much. I'll make a small request at the very beginning. Even though I've spent my entire life defending each and every policy of the government of India and, of course, territorial integrity, in this debate, I do think I should take a slightly different perspective, which is not defending India, but defending your, or having a point of view on the title of what your debate today is. And as regards China, may I request you to ask Bharat or General Asthana, or maybe even Shruti, who's done a lot of work on this China, to explain what China's views are. My views are very clear on what should be India's views. I find it very interesting that the main proponent of the subject has conceded right at the beginning, with Mr. Ranade himself saying that we can't have a two-China policy. That's, I think, absolutely right. He's spot on as someone who knows what we are talking about. Do you know there are 14 countries which recognize Taiwan? And do you also know that even though the Taiwanese sometimes say we are not China, their formal borders, etc., say they are the same thing. So I'm afraid this issue should be well understood by us in when we talk about more than one China policy, etc. That we should interact with. The Americans don't have an embassy in Taiwan. I think this is also something people should understand. Secondly, you should understand that the contacts between Taiwan and mainland China are fantastic. If anyone here, and of course I know Mr. Ranade has known others have been, if you go to Beijing, the streets are full of flights going to Taipei. It's only we Indians who have that diffidence. There's no need of having any diffidence in dealing with Taiwan. After all, they sit at WTO. If you look at the Olympics, their athletes are taking part. We are with them. So we should do deals. We should do it. Let the minister go. It makes no difference. I think, when we opened our so-called quasi-diplomatic mission, the Chinese said yes. So these are things that you should do. Taiwan has lots of capacities, capabilities. You must certainly leverage. But on the much bigger thing, I want to point out something to you. India will be the world's largest country in population terms in about 5 or 6 years' time, say 7 or 8 years' time. We will be among the 3 largest economies in the world by, let's say, latest mid-2030s. Let's be very clear. We need to play the normal game. Demography is in our favor. Many things of geopolitics are in our favor. Let's not jump into risque matters. This is not a small little country playing these sort of games. And it is not also a country which is trying to retain any kind of hegemony. We are building into it. We must be quite mature and quite seasoned in it. In terms of our issues with China on Ladakh, on the Eastern Front, we need to be strongly resolute as we have been there, and there's no doubt about it. But I think on a few points in this forum, it should be clear to people, a few things should be known. This business of Tibet and, sovereignty, suzerainty, there is hardly anyone who today disputes the fact that the Chinese did have some kind of suzerainty or whatever it is. Anyway, there was the kind of independence that we talk about did not exist. This is something I think quite clear. Everybody accepts this worldwide. Secondly, in terms of our maps in this Aksai Chin area, it's only in 1954 that we drew a hard line. Now, we all know it. We know it. The Brits were playing their own game. And incidentally, this great game is not an Anglo-Russian affair. It started off as a French-Russian affair, and then after Waterloo got taken over by the Brits. There are some very interesting aspects of all this we should understand. My understanding of all this, and secondly, I want to point out, do you think the Kuomintang, the ROC government's positions on any of these things, whether it's Aksai Chin or Arunachal Pradesh, is any different from that of the PRC? Not at all. It has never been different. And we need to understand this. We're behaving like new kids on the block. We are a young country in terms of member states of the world, Westphalian kind of thing. We don't have to behave like this. In any case, we don't have to lead in somebody else's war. As and when it becomes an opportune situation, you do what you have to do. You need to be resolute with China, but let whoever needs to play the big game, let them play that game. Let them do what they want to. And we don't have to get into it. We will get nothing as a result. We need to focus on just one thing: economic growth in India. And for that, use every opportunity, because that is what will give you the abilities to be staying power. Remember, if China is what it is today in terms of hegemony, it's purely because of its economy. And that's the same thing which has been true for the United States, and the same thing which has been true for Europe. Remember this. I'll stop now, but I'm happy to take this intervention because I see everybody else going to come from one side. So I'm quite happy to chat about it. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to bring in Shruti next, because we want to talk a little bit about China's expansionist tendencies. We have, first of all, when China took over Tibet many decades ago, India sort of was supportive and all, and it remains one of the things that has been a big criticism of Mr. Nehru's regime at the time. But since then, China has become quite aggressive in South China Sea, Senkaku Islands. Then they lay claim to a lot of other Indian territories, Korea as well, arguably. So isn't there, and right now the thing is, what Puri sir said is India shouldn't get into these kind of tussles. No country alone wants to be questioning or challenging China's policy. But isn't this becoming like a game theory? Nobody moves, and China sort of gets away, and eventually they get successful with their overall expansionist policy, because nobody wants to be the first mover to mess with a big hegemon. Shruti, can you hear me? I think the screen seems to be frozen. Professor Karnad, can I invite you to address this point? You're on mute, sir. Let me unmute you.
Okay, there you are. Thank you. I think some of the problems that India's had have been, in a sense, put forward by Jay and Manjeev. I'm sorry, this amounts to what I call the punching bag theory or Indian policy of being a punching bag where China is concerned. Now, if you're always going to be a follower and going to await someone else to do something, no one else will do it, because no one has the stakes that we are involved in vis-a-vis China. You see, Singapore is not going to do it. None of the ASEAN states are going to do it, and Japan is not going to do it. Either we take the lead in many of these aspects, or we settle down to riding American coattails. Americans are entirely untrustworthy, entirely unreliable. I've written a number of books on this. I mean, history shows without doubt that America cannot be relied on. In fact, that's the kind of conclusion now being reached by most Asian countries. Please. So if that is the case, then the question becomes, as you said, who's going to bell the cat? Now, are you going to take the initiative or are you not? Because you are the largest country on the periphery of China. we have the largest, we have the biggest problems at stake vis-a-vis China. An unresolved border, etc., the whole damn thing. A whole basket full of problems. Unbalanced trade, we are the receiving end every which way. If you're going to just keep quiet and say, well, let's just wait for someone else to do it, no one is going to do it. So somewhere down the line, I think we'll have to, in a sense, get hooked on the bait and get pulled up and pull up ourselves, in a sense, to lead this kind of an effort against China. How can that be done? Look, we are a little too impressed, by the Chinese build-up military, etc. And my point has always been, it can very easily be negated by doing what North Korea has done to America, by, Pakistan doing to us, etc. And I've been saying this for about 10 years now. Use nuclear weapons as a short fuse. Go first use. It doesn't matter. The point is this. If you threaten to go nuclear at first use, say within Eastern Ladakh or Arunachal, wherever, what happens is they are put on notice. It is their risk. They have to take the risk, not us. Because we'll still be in a passive defensive mode, whether it is atomic demolition munitions that I've been advocating or anything else, or forward deployed canisterized Agnis. The fact is, once you have that kind of, you draw a line, you draw the red line, not leave it to the Chinese to draw the red lines, because we end up always respecting the red line, the Chinese red line. What the heck about they're respecting our red lines, which we never define? What is your red line? How much insult are you going to take? How much humiliation are you going to take before the worm turns? Are you a goddamn worm? I mean, this is the reason why India has lost respect all over the world. I'm sorry. I travel around, again, maybe in the same circuits that many of you do. What do you hear? What I hear is, an eroding respect for India, because we want to always take the easy way out. I'm sorry, Manjeev, but that's the thing that, in a sense, you're saying, be in the background, wait for everybody, then be part of the crowd as you go forward. No. And on Tibet, etc. What is the designation for Tibet, even now in our parleys with the Chinese? Is the Tibetan Autonomous Region. Autonomous region of Tibet was the basis for our accepting, Manjeev, yes. The autonomy of Tibet was really the basis of our accepting, in a sense, however you might say, there was the fait accompli and on the ground, but the aspect was that. Now, we should just get back to it and say, our recognition of your presence in Tibet was only because you promised Tibet autonomy. And as long as the Dalai Lama and everybody else says they have no genuine autonomy, there's cultural genocide going on, etc., we do not stand by our original commitment. And as far as the two China policy, exactly, Sushma Swaraj is absolutely right. If there is no respect for one India, there is no respect for one China. Well, screw the goddamn Chinese. What's the worst they can do? Please, Manjeev, Jay, I ask you, I challenge you, tell me what it is that the Chinese can do that's going to unsettle us. I mean, when I ask this sort of a question to not just my Indian friends, but when I go abroad to sinologists there, everybody is quiet, they can't come up with anything. What's the worst thing that can happen? That won't hurt.
If I may, Professor Karnad, do you see there is a risk if India were to be the first one to unilaterally change its stance? Would China make us an example so that no one else crosses this precedent?
What will they make? What will they do? That's the point I always ask. I'm not sure what General Asthana has would react to this. So what can they do to us? Please.
Yes.
Don't be so goddamn frightened of what the Chinese can do. They should begin to worry about what we can do to them. How about what I've been saying for 30 years now? The time when P. Raghunath, Manjeev's colleague perhaps, when he was the Foreign Secretary, came before the plenary in the National Security Advisory Board, and Subramanian stopped me from going after him. When I asked the fellow, why is it that you didn't react in a tit-for-tat manner by strategically missile arming all the states on China's periphery with nuclear weapons? Why not? because they did it to us. They broke the precedent. They set the precedent. They broke the non-proliferation understandings, etc. Why didn't we respond? 30 years later, we are still screwing around, with the BrahMos, this, that, and the other. God damn it, what stops us from growing the whole hog? Making life really uncomfortable for the Chinese. Now, of course, there are the diplomats who say, oh no, you can't do this, you can't do that. I mean, all the diplomats can come up is why we can't do something. I've never heard any diplomats who have said why we can do things. I mean, I'm sorry. This perhaps reflection on our diplomacy and our foreign office and our thinking generally for 70 years as a supplicant, as a diffident, unself-confident country. We have always been that way. Too long, we are just, hopelessly behind China in that respect. And I'll end on this little thing. The humiliation that the Chinese suffered, as they believed they suffered in the 100 years, right, since the Stephen Hay and the open door policy, right? How did they use it? They've used it to mobilize, marshal the public spirit, the anger, the humiliation. What have we done with 800 years of slavery? I'm saying this because, I use the word in my books. I've gone into Stanislaw Andreski's famous phrase for India, a land of subjugations. That's what he called India. He's a Polish sociologist, and it so very correctly has called India a land of subjugations. Why have we been subjugated? Because of our mentality. Because we always think of ourselves as a secondary state, and in part of someone else's design for the region. Never an autonomous state, sovereign in ourselves, and looking after and pursuing our interests, come what may, at whatever cost.
To underscore,
let's get General Asthana in.
To underscore Bharat's comment about he didn't use the term, but timidity. That is why I started with our negotiations on Tibet. That is exactly what there was, and that is carried on right through. So anyway, I just wanted to make this quick interjection.
Let's get General Asthana in. Sir, do you think we can unilaterally change our stance on the one China policy? And if we were to do that, what could be the consequences for India? What are the risks?
Firstly, I agree with Dr. Bharat Karnad. We have been reactive for too long. Now, what can be done and what not? Before that, let me put some facts on ground for the benefit of the viewers, because your topic per se must get clarified. Gentlemen, it's a fact that there is no written commitment or policy by the name of one China policy of India. There is nothing like that. It is a Chinese policy. It's not Indian policy. And this Chinese policy also goes back to, there is a contradiction between what is Chinese principle and what is Chinese policy. Now, one China principle comes out from 1992 consensus, where they think that they sorted it out with Taiwan to say that there is only one China because both were using China. But as far as interpretation of this is concerned, it is two different interpretations. Chinese think that we told Taiwanese that it is one China, one country, two principle. Taiwanese say no, as far as it is one China, no doubt, but it is ROC which is the original China. And we lost mainland China in a civil war. That is what is their stance, and that is what the stance of their historians, that is the stance of DPP leaders, and that was also the stance of KMT till 2008. So this is one part of it. And therefore, the second thing which everybody thinks that the whole world feels it that way. Why whole world feels it that way? Because there is a UN resolution, that is UN resolution 2758. Now, gentlemen, this resolution only says who is going to represent in United Nations. It does not say whether there are two China or there is one China or there is objection to two Chinas. No, it only says who represents in 2758, and voting was done only for that. And in that, earlier, the communist China, despite being in existence and despite being governing the mainland China, could not get this resolution passed. Earlier, the resolution in 1668 failed actually. And Taiwan represented in United Nations China till 1971, till 2758 resolution passed. And why was it passed was because Nixon and Kissinger wanted to be goody-goody with the communists because they had some agendas against the USSR. So that's the history. Now, therefore, there is nothing like red line and there is nothing like what is being followed. So one China policy is, if you believe, all the countries, they are following it in different manner. Somebody says, okay, we respect your one China policy. Somebody says we are in agreement with your one China policy. Somebody says we take note of. And rightly so, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj has very rightly put it, if you respect our one India policy, then we respect your one China policy. It's not one China policy of India. So therefore, we don't have to abrogate any policy. All what we have done so far is, we have got a cultural and trade office there. And so many countries have got. Ambassador brought out very rightly, 15 countries have got diplomatic relations with them. There is an resolution or there is a convention on rights and duties of state. This is 1933 convention. As per this convention, a country is supposed to have permanent population, territory, government capacity to get into other negotiations. Taiwan has all of them. It has population more than 75% of the world countries. It has territory more than 2/3 of the world countries. There is no damn reason why Taiwan is not a country, and even if nobody recognizes, it is a country. Even your Wikipedia today, if you Google, says Taiwan is the country. So this is the status. Now, as far as US is concerned, they broke their relations in 1979, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. And at that point of time, when they did it, at that point of time, immediately they signed Taiwan Relation Act, and which almost gave something similar. And thereafter, they have been signing series of acts. And the latest is the National Defense Authorization Act. And now another one is going in as to, that is against the Intervention Act. So therefore, there were certain agreements which were done between United States and China, not India and China, which said that they will not declare independence, they will not do things like that, they will not go nuclear and all that. And at the same time, US gave them a red line that you will not change the status quo unilaterally and no intervention will be done. So this is the status as far as this policy is concerned. Now coming on to India, the fact that they dragged you that on Kashmir issue to UNSC, and Mr. Ranade is very right. In United Service Institute, there people had been coming and saying that we respect that Kashmir is an internal matter of India and Pakistan long back. And unfortunately, CPEC, we have to negotiate with Pakistan because they are physically holding that ground. And their ambassador, in fact, also said sometimes that, okay, why can't we call it China-Pakistan-India corridor, which was refuted by their external Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's a separate issue. But the fact is that they changed their stance. They changed the goalpost. If they have changed the goalpost, there is no reason why we should not change. And I agree with Mr. Karnad. They can do nothing whatsoever. If USA could not do anything to North Korea, if we have not been able to, we have been reactive throughout, even against Pakistan, just because it's a nuclear state, we have not physically attacked Pakistan. Even in Parakram, despite our parliament being attacked, we stopped short of it. So therefore, there is no reason. It's basically mindset. Today, even if there is a war, it's one more hill and nothing more, either side. That is the status, because the terrain friction is such that nothing very much can happen. Nuclear war is a mutually assured destruction. That's called as MAD. And therefore, nobody will venture it. And that is the reason why we need to be reactive. We don't have to say that we are abrogating any policy. There is none. All what we have to do is we have to engage with Taiwan. We have to continue when they talk of Kashmir. We just have to remind them that there are 3 teams from China. It is triple China participating in Olympics. It is Taipei, China is Chinese Taipei, it is Hong Kong, and it is PRC. There are 3 of them. As of today, they are participating. So let's not mince our words. on that issue. There is enough. China occupied Tibet, China occupied Xinjiang, China occupied Inner Mongolia. So there is multi-China. And therefore, if you do not follow one India policy, we will follow multi-China policy. That should be our stance. As far as and even if the government doesn't want to, perhaps diplomatically you want to be nice, so you only say, we respect your policies. That is provided the other guy is respecting your policies. If he doesn't respect, then I think this respect is, that this issue, I think, should be now taken off the table. Back to you.
Yajur, just a question. I don't think General Saab would like to see more than one Indian team take part in the Olympics. Thank you.
Yes, certainly not. So that is exactly why we have to tell those buggers that you have to follow that one India policy. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely, got it. So, sir, you pointed out some important things, right? We are having issues of Hong Kong, there is Xinjiang, there is Tibet. There's so many multiple issues. The theme that comes out from all of this is a increasingly aggressive China and policies which are expansionist. If we actually look at some of the quotes of President Mao himself, he had in the past said that Japan appropriated, that a lot of the Chinese territories were appropriated by other nations. He said Japan had appropriated Korea, Taiwan was taken by Japan as well, and so was what they call the Ryukyu Islands. England had taken from them Bhutan, Nepal, Hong Kong. France had taken Annam, which is Vietnam. So in their mindset, it would not be surprising if they are able to get to these, then they might start expanding even further. So Shruti, I want to get you in to talk about China's expansionist nature, and is it wise for India right now, as Mr. Puri said, it would be prudent not to pick up tussles?
Thanks very much,
wait for too long and then they become powerful and there is really not. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks very much, Rur, and it's an actual privilege to be part of such a distinguished panel. I'm sorry, the internet is playing truant as usual, so I seem to have missed like a cracker of a debate so far. But let me just, for me, in the interest of time, let me hone back to the topic and the question you sort of posed to us when we were thinking about this debate. And now for me, the question posed, has a simple sort of answer. That is that the reassessment really has been underway for a while. Therefore, challenge before us really, if you want to call it one, is the degree of intent, the consistency of our policy, and the end result that we are looking at. So I think that's my point of beginning. Now, Mr. Ranade sort of established the historical context and so on and so forth. So I understand that the whole debate is really centered around the lack of reciprocity of sensitivities. But I do think that it has to go beyond demand to sort of oversimplify the issue and sort of make it like, a binary choice between a declaratory policy or what is infamous as, playing the Tibet card, because I think neither of this is helpful and the debate is sort of far more nuanced. Now, if you want to quickly elaborate on some of this. If you remember last year in October 2020, the Emir response to the Chinese government note or reprimand to the Indian media's coverage of the Taiwan National Day, demanding that they follow the One China principle, was that, well, the Indian media is free and it reports on issues of merit. So I think if you understand, strategic omission as a policy by design is something that we've adopted specifically since 2010, and based on the fact that India, India feels that Beijing needs to be sensitive and committed to what our core interests are as well. So if it expected reciprocity. Now, you could also say that it's symptomatic of the argument that it was structural concerns, like Mr. Ranade pointed out, vis-a-vis regional stability that shaped India's support for the PRC's One China policy in the 1950s. And now, those very interests seem to be redefining themselves today. And Galwan certainly has been an inflection point. Now, if you see on Tibet, we have seen a lot of political signaling recently, whether it's the Prime Minister wishing His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or the Arunachal Chief Minister saying that its state shares borders with Tibet and not with China, or how the Indian government, went about its announcement of the deployment of the special sort of frontier force of elite commandos who are raised from the Tibetan exile community. And if you also remember last year that the funeral of the SSF company leader was given a lot of publicity, especially politically, in the Indian media. So, you know, you may understand that all of these are tactical moves, but at the end of the day, we also need to remember that, you know, for China, all of India's links with Tibet are an imposition of reputational cost, which they view as losing of face. Similarly, with Taiwan, you know, we've seen that political relations have been functional really under the radar from 1995 and picked up steam post 2008. And under Prime Minister Modi and President Tsai's administration, the relationship has really picked up momentum because, you know, we've sort of seen perhaps a sync of ideological and political leanings working out simultaneously, where there's sort of a systematic realignment that Asia is undergoing. So, but the point remains that, you know, we need, as we build on all of these relationships, it has to go beyond transactional. But my last point really is that any assessment, what we do today, is based on both opportunities and challenges. But for India, as many of our speakers have pointed out, there are multiple fault lines at play. So while post Galwan, we've sort of taken a slew of economic, political, and sort of military measures in how we envisage our China sort of policy. Our vulnerabilities in terms of, you know, when we talk about ramping up connectivity in the border, scaling up socio-economic development, remain key challenges. Now, China is also digging deep in terms of the battle for influence. That's something I work on in terms of information operations. So when you talk about ethnic fault lines, you know, there's concern on the Tibetanization of Himalayan Buddhism and what impact that has. There are sensitivities over the succession of the Dalai Lama issue and, you know, what impact that has on a granular level. And very few of us understand these very, you know, nuanced theological debates, but we have experts on the panel here who have written a lot on all of this stuff. And I have done a field study in Arunachal Pradesh, and I can tell you that, you know, there is considerable friction over the Tibetan rehabilitation policy among locals, for example. Now, these are all fault lines that China will exploit. And I think, therefore, when we, you know, when we make these grand sort of discussions on reassessment, etc., it's of course required because any policy requires consistent reassessment. But I think it also needs to balance aims of capacity building and how we want to keep our leverage. So I'll sort of end here and then we can discuss this further.
Thank you, Shruti. You talked about fault lines, right? And you gave examples of ethnic fiction in Arunachal Pradesh and all. If we talk about fault lines on the Chinese side, we have a Hong Kong, which is exploding. We have Xinjiang, where the whole world is expressing its outrage now. EU and US are coming up with sanctions on China, and India, which is a country which likes to think of itself as a country committed to human rights and anti-expansionist power, it remains silent. So if China is there, if we are worried about China exploiting these minor fault lines on our side, what about these massive fault lines? And there is a question of, from a geopolitical standpoint, that can we exploit those fault lines? But then there is also a question, shouldn't we, even as the largest democratic power in the world, the largest democracy in the world, a country that represents the second largest population of Muslims, we don't condemn the atrocities against the Uyghur population, or we don't support democracy in Hong Kong. We don't talk about that the people of Taiwan should have self-determination, which is one of the fundamentals of free world. Why, even from a moralistic standpoint, we don't see India stand up, right? And then I go back to the word that we used at the very beginning. What is the reason behind this timidity? So I want to bring back Mr. Puri on this one.
Yeah, George, thank you very much. You know, I, for one, very strongly believe that on all those subject matters, we should be strong. And there should be no question that this is China, and there is no reason for us to back off. This debate started off with something much more specific, which was something on which only Mr. Bharat Karnad has said we should do it. I hope I'm reading him right, and I like it because, you know, why not? Debate, must be, what should I say, loud and clear, and he has the pulpit of being the emeritus professor. The rest of us are only practitioners. So go ahead. Man, India recognizes Taiwan. Nobody else does so. I wish India all the best. Because, you know, it's not what they can do. What is your great advantage in doing something like this? Do you know even last year our trade with China went up? It became the largest trading partner of India. So forget all some of these things. Let's understand some of the realities. I don't know how many of you actually are familiar with projects and stuff like that. You know, there are some issues of capacities. There are some things. I'm the last one to say mimic the Chinese, but at least learn from them. There's a famous thing called bide your time. It's a pretty important element. So, you know what Bharat saying is fine. There will be a time, hopefully, for that. But he's already derided the guys whose coattails we're trying to catch. So, what do you want me to say about
Manjeev, you have bided our time for the last 70 years.
Sure, Bharat. Look, but I've been in this business around the same time. You're a little younger than me, but, you know, that's it. So, Yajur, coming to, you know, Uyghurs, etc. You've yourself answered the question. What do you want me to say? In a public forum like this, I don't want to say it. But the fact of the matter is that we end up with them, or we are happy to end up with them on all sorts of things. Look at something that happened recently, the Myanmar Resolution. Who were among two of the great ones who, you know, took a similar kind of views, India and China. Now, you know, the reasons are there are many other things which are happening in the world. Let me take you into the area of climate change, very big negotiation. Ideally, we should try and separate ourselves from China. Huge emitters, even in per capita terms. But, you know, frankly, that diminishes your negotiating abilities. That's also a reality of the world. You know, therefore, some of these things have to be done in measured, calibrated manner. What can they do to you? You know, it's not going to happen in terms, General Saab, of one hill or five hills. It's not. It doesn't work like that at all. But it works in several ways for a country which is near getting to be at the very top. And for us, many of these things matter. So yes, we must be resolute. We must tell them that, no, this won't happen. We want to do the Taiwanese National Day. Please go ahead. We want to send our minister there. No issue at all. After all, their ministers go there. They have no problem with that. And on those things, you can go ahead. But, you know, these red lines, it's not a question of there are no red lines. There are red lines. All countries have red lines. But this is my red line, and I must ensure that it is respected. They will keep working on their red line. And we need to be a little circumspect. I have a very simple point. Taiwan is an important player in the world. It's an important player not because of this geostrategy. It's an important player because of technological investitions which it has got. And for the next many years, it's an important player. We must play the game with them. We must be there strongly. And if we have to ward off China, we ward off China. No issue on that. But play this sensibly, play this with due diligence, with due thinking, and work on it in a manner that helps us. Simply going ahead, jumping and doing things, no. There are good reasons why it doesn't happen. The word is not timidity, it's maturity. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. I have to bring Gen Asthana. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
I'd like to come here to perhaps answer some of the things. Firstly, we know the difference between the comprehensive national power of China and India. When I say that we should not be reactive and we should be active, it does not mean that I am talking that, okay, we should be a warmonger or we should be fighting or something like that. No, that's not the case. What I am trying to say and what need to be noted is that for last 70 years you have been reactive. Today you do not even have a national security strategy in open domain. You have not even called China as an adversary officially while those people have done whatever they have done. Today, can you be that reactive? Should you be that reactive? That's the question. Secondly, when we talk of USA, they have issued a national security strategy. Russia has issued one. China has issued one. They have named their adversaries. Why is it that you can't name it? Secondly, the comprehensive national power difference and practicality which you are trying to bring out, the same practicality is also applicable between Pakistan and India. You see your history. Kargil, Pakistan acted and we reacted. Similarly, all other things, whether it is terrorism, they are acting, we are reacting. Everything has been a reactionary mode. Similarly, as far as China is concerned, Every time when they needle, we respond. Have we ever thought of needling? No. I don't say that you needle. I don't say that. But you must create a capability that creates a doubt in his mind that if I go beyond a point, I should not do it. Now, why is it that China has drawn a red line for you, and you say that no, I have no red line? Why is it that he talks of Kashmir of yours and he takes you to UNSC and you say I don't interfere in somebody's internal affairs? Somebody should not interfere in mine. Whereas he is doing it every day. He does it on daily basis. So therefore, the problem is there is a limit to being reactive. So therefore, I think it is time, and within the bounds of, we know that there is a problem, there is a trade cost. What you are trying to tell me is that yes, there is a cost. There is a cost to be paid for everything. There is no doubt about it. But when it comes to the cost as far as trade is concerned, when it comes to the cost of economic imbalance is concerned, the same thing is applicable the other way around also. So therefore, it is said that if he creates, let's say, two-front situation for you or a different kind of situation for you, you create multi-front situation for him. If you think you alone cannot take it on, then you have your allies. The fact that you have gone for Quad, you don't have to name these things. All these things are, without being named, are being done. Like we joined Quad, we are the swearing-in ceremony of Sai was attended. Similarly, a number of other things. This is the Dalai Lama's greeting was made public this time. So there are certain indicators and signals which need to be given and which should consistently be given. There is, as I mentioned, and I am quite proponent of that there is no one China policy as far as India is concerned. India is only following, this is one China policy is of China, and you are only either agreeing or abiding by it. That's it. It's not your policy. So you don't have to break it. You don't have to announce that you have to break it. You do.
Dr. Asthana,
are in dealing with Taiwan.
Asthana, I want to actually build upon your point. You made a very important point. India is not some ordinary country which, if it goes another way, it becomes isolated like a North Korea. If a vast country with 1.3 billion people and a major economic power today changes its stance on China, it's a huge pain for China as well. We are not a little tiny Switzerland. We are a massive country, and the perception matters a lot to China. A major economy and a democracy changes its stance. Doesn't this become a pain? Just not even doing anything, just changing our stance that, okay, now we question China's sovereignty over Tibet or over Taiwan. Even that becomes, not even changing the stance, just questioning it could become a huge pain for China. And generally people don't talk about military costs because China and India are both quite pragmatic governments. But generally the bigger risk is the economic war, right? People point out that India, for us, China is a massive, it's probably our biggest trading partner now, if not the second biggest. And for them, we are not really even in the top 5 or 7. So it's disproportionate, right? They are much bigger than us. But we're not small. We're not small. Like, it's still, you lose. Can you really isolate and end all your relations with the largest population country and such a big economy? Is that even feasible in this globalized world? I want to bring Professor Karnad, and after that, Mr. Ranade on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just, as the general said and everybody has been saying, reactive. You have added passive defensive to reactive. In other words, you're virtually inert. I'm sorry to say, even militarily, our military is no great shakes in respect to preparing for China. You are just beating up on Pakistan. Your entire structure is capable of handling China. You should have had 3 mountain corps, etc. Anyway, these are things ridiculous. And so military really cannot then say that they're not responsible for not having the capability. Because you have to have the capability for the government to act on. When you do not have the manifesto, you don't have the capability. But any government of the day would say, well, yeah, we don't have the capability because, hey, our generals say they can't handle any damn thing that of a serious nature on the northern and northeastern front. This is a real problem. That said, the thing about, everybody's talking about trade and so on. I mean, the trade is so unbalanced and so favors China. It is, it should be used as a deterrent against them to say you'll be denied the access to the Indian markets if you don't goddamn, stop acting up. But we don't do that. I mean, what are we talking about trade? Where is there any, equitability in the trade? If you're talking about, the between the imports and the export thing, it's something like 70-30, meaning the imbalance is that great. We import 70% of all kinds of crap from China, and we send off in the usual, actually a neo-colonial economic pattern that we've gotten into: leather, raw materials, ore, gemstone, all this crap. And that's there's very little value-added IT stuff and all that crap. I know I've been dealing with the Indian software companies, and they face the kind of problems that most companies that want to do business in China face. Now, so what trade are we talking about that we need to protect vis-a-vis China? They need to protect the access to the Indian market. That's why they've not been, what could they do once we said no Huawei, no ZTE in India, or any of the 5G crap, when we have an indigenous 6G people working here, which the government does not respect. I'm sorry. And they have gone to the government at the highest levels here. I mean, many of you perhaps, I don't think Manjeev knows about any of this, but the fact of the matter is, in 6G, there are Indian companies that are capable of doing it. But because we are so diffident, and we'd rather go to Ericsson or Nokia rather than trust our own people, that how was ZTE and Huawei built up by China? By going to Nokia and Ericsson? This is why we have so lagged behind and are falling farther behind. Atmanirbharta is nonsense with this kind of attitude of the government and of the people representing the Indian country and interests. We cannot go on being a sort of not just a supplicant, but a wasteful one, in the sense you're a spendthrift. You're giving money away to upkeep industries abroad, while you are, in a sense, neglecting investment and trusting Indian talent, indigenous companies to produce goods that you want. And this is in every sector, from telecom to everything else. So Atmanirbharta has just become a farce. It's a slogan. It's rhetoric. But the substance is you get burned to manufacture here and you call it Atmanirbharta. I mean, you have to have some sense, do we not? How long do we keep on fooling ourselves? And this is exactly at the center of our China policy. We are not in China's league. Let's be very clear about it. We are not. They have the kind I've been saying for literally from my first book 30 years ago to now, that because we don't have the strategic sense that the Chinese have, let's do the next best thing. Let's just emulate and imitate China because we don't have strategic brains to do any original thinking of our own. Because we have been for so long, shall we say, a country with a dependency complex, that, let's at least then, that's the example, if you want China to be, that's the example one should emulate. Not, join up with everybody else riding coattails and then say, well, India will sometime in 100 years from now will do something or something. This is a defeatist attitude, a fatalistic attitude we cannot anymore afford.
Professor Karnad, I want to question some of our assumptions here. General Asthana had said, in so many years, we have not even declared China as an adversary. Now, personally, I've had the fortune to spend a lot of time in mainland, as well as Hong Kong, as well as Taiwan. And especially in the mainland, it's very interesting because they generally never think of India as an adversary. In their media, interestingly, India actually does not capture so much of the space as China does in our media, which is normal because it's a much bigger economy. But actually, even the wars, which are for us like war shattering, the Doklam conflict, and stuff, you'd be quite surprised. The normal people there, and I was there when that was happening, they're unaware because it sort of gets buried in the pages, in the middle of the pages. And interestingly, the general perception in China, at least the way it seems to me, is that they view India as a client state of the West. Generally, they see Indians not as like the way we see ourselves as having our complete strategic autonomy and all that. The Chinese view is that Indians are just mimicking all the criticism, the false criticism published about China in the Western papers, whether it's atrocities in the week in the...
Yeah, but the point is precisely the Chinese are right. The Chinese are right. We, what do I say? We are a dependency-minded people. You know, we'd rather latch on. I called it, you know, what's this? Whatever I call it. The point of the matter is, I think that we have so long depended on taking cues from everybody else, usually the West. When the Chinese then accuse us of being, you know, Chinese imperialists, running dogs, and so on. That's what they've been calling us from Nehru's days. You know, they're actually right. In real sense, they're right. And if you're saying, because, you know, the Chinese right in perceiving our insignificance. K.C. Pant, when he was the defense minister, I recall him telling me that when he went to Beijing the first time and he asked about how they saw India, it turned out they virtually told him in so many words that India is not even on our threat radar. I mean, you are of such little consequence. Please, let's at least not blow ourselves like Thackeray's flock up to ox size. You know, you are nothing. Now let's start with the premise. You are nothing. Then you build on it. In fact, how much of a spoiler can you be for China? Because we have to do that. You have to have realpolitik sense of hurting China now. Now we cannot say, oh, well, let's go mutually, you know, band barter and go into the sunset, you see, with hands, hand in hand with China and so on. No, it doesn't happen that way. Now the thing is to see how can we spoil it for China? Because they have spoiled us so beautifully for years together, every which way. Why? Because as the Chinese, as Jay would tell you, they believe in Wai Chi. They occupy space around you until you have no room to maneuver. While we think it's a shatranj, you know, one queen piece down and everything works. It doesn't work that way. They're playing in a different game and they're succeeding. So Chinese are far superior strategically. We have no strategic mindset to speak of. Not our military, not our government, not anybody in official circles.
I want to bring Mr. Ranade on this one. There is a view, sir, that from Chinese side at least, that the conflict they have, or let's not even call it conflict, the rivalry is with the big powers, with US mainly and US allies. And they tend to see India as just a sort of satellite. The conflict is not with India. In this view, the things that like the Doklam conflict or the other conflicts are more China testing the water, that how much is it going to bother the big Western allies, how much they can push the envelope. And India is sort of like a peripheral thing, which is which in their view is a country which feels a strong fealty towards its former colonial powers. That is generally the impression I collected, and it doesn't mean for much in front of us experts like you. I'll get you in, Shruti. Let first Mr. Ranade answer, and then we'll get to Shruti.
Well, thank you.
Is there some truth to this, sir? That's all I was wanting to ask. Is there some truth to this?
A number of points have been raised here, but let me address yours first. The fact is that China started building itself up to take on, and I use the word take on, the United States, to rival, if not surpass, the United States. Now, obviously, all their capabilities were built, therefore, to take on a superpower. Neither us nor Europe counted. In fact, they wanted to drive a wedge between Europe and the United States. That was their policy, still is their policy. The second point, you made a remark that when you were in China, you found that we hardly merited any space in the press or in the people's mind. Well, how much space does, let me say, Lesotho figure in your mind or your press? You are looking at the bigger countries. You're not looking at smaller countries. The same goes there. But the difference is that whereas in India we have a free press, very vibrant press, free debate and a very vibrant debate, and we can talk about what we like. In China, they're told what to think and what to write. Thrice a day, there are advisories issued by the Chinese Communist Party's Central Committee Propaganda Department. Thrice a day, advisories telling them what to print, how much importance to give it, which kind of space it should be given. And where there is a doubt, they tell them to lift the report from Xinhua, which is their official authorized news agency. So when the people are exposed only to that kind of news, they will think what the government asked them to think. I can go on, but let me just stop there. And let me come to 2 points. This debate or discussion, I find, has gone into sort of a mode which says we should rush into taking precipitate steps and abandon caution and due thought. No one has recommended that. No one has recommended that. People have said that if I am punished, and I'd like to see, I hear your response, if I get into your house and capture your drawing room, what are you going to do? That's what's happening. And then I go further and I take your kitchen also. So that is precisely what is happening with India. And let me get back to the point I made right in the beginning. It is a question of mindset. Our mindset was visible when we started our negotiations with China to recognize China. And this is the point I made, that we are the ones who were granting the Chinese recognition. And the Chinese were the ones who were negotiating with us as to when we should do it, etc. What does that indicate? The second point made here was about trade. I was quite surprised, in fact, when I heard that. There is no trade between India and China. It's a Manchester kind of situation. The Chinese are taking raw materials from us. And I frankly doubt, like Bharat, I've been on the NSAB, we made our own recommendations, but I doubt whether we have actually done a comprehensive study as to the quantum of resources that we have underground. The rare materials, the rare metals, the minerals, etc., that we are going to need as we modernize. But we are allowing people to just export this stuff. So these are the questions that we need to look at. And I personally am very happy. I have been fighting this crusade from the time I was in service against Huawei and ZTE, not because I don't like them. I love Chinese food. I found my stay in China comfortable, apart from a whole lot of negative things. That's another matter. But they are listening into you. Today I find our press jumping around about Pegasus. What is Pegasus? Pegasus is a simple, ordinary hacking of a mobile telephone. The Chinese are doing it sitting without the need to hack, because most of your mobile phones, your Airtels, your Vodafones, etc., the backroom operations are handled by Huawei and ZTE, who earn, at least up to 6 years ago, they were earning $1 billion a year in net profit from India. So that is the kind of trade. This is not trade. The third point I would like to make when I'm talking about mindset is China has a number of vulnerabilities. These have been studied. People know what it is within the concerned quarters in the government. We've all been part of it. Now, it's a question only of imposing costs. When NSB happened, when the Masood Azhar situation was going on, did we react? We made a noise, yes. But finally, it was another power that came in to do what was necessary. But the Chinese didn't hesitate in being up in front and blocking you. Similarly, on Kashmir. And now, having asked Pakistan to incorporate Gilgit and make its representatives members of the Pakistan National Assembly, what they're doing, to put it very simply, is they're breaking Kashmir. So, when all this is going on, why should we still be hesitant to impose costs? Today we have the Agni 5. And let me tell you, until you can threaten and hurt the Han heartland, not China, the Han heartland, the Chinese don't bother. And today with the Agni 5, you can hurt the Han heartland. They will sit and take notice, provided they feel that you have the gumption to go ahead and do it. Let me give you one instance, a real life instance. 2013, when the intrusions in the Depsang Plains happened, if you recall that just before Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's visit, the Chinese military attaché here, a Major General, his remark was when someone was talking to him and all that, I won't go into the details, but he said that this intrusion was cleared at the highest levels. The Politburo examined it, and they also reached the conclusion that India will not cancel Li Keqiang's visit because they're afraid of annoying China, afraid of annoying China. I think that is the point that we need to make. It's not a question of what can the Chinese do. They have done what they want to do, and they're going to do more. But the point is, what are you going to do to make them stop from continuing such actions? So I think the basic question is our mindset. I think a point has been made here that there's a limit to what the Chinese can do. Certainly, because the Chinese also realize that we can also do something. You know, even a worm turns, they say. And I just want to make one concluding remark. Again, going back to your point, when you said we are a big country, if we do something, it will damage China. Yes, certainly. In fact, if we put our mind to it, we can derail China's growth. And I think the time has come when we need to seriously start thinking about it. There are many ways. That is not here for such discussion. But I think it is time we started thinking about it. And I hope Bharat is wrong. And also, I hope Manjeev and Shruti are wrong. That there is thinking like this reaching certain proper levels.
Thank you, sir. Shruti, you wanted to come in. Can you, when you talk, can you?
Sure.
Can you
I'm
also
sorry.
address? Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No, I had two short points. I just quickly wanted to sort of come in on this question of perception. You know, I think sometimes we give in to a lot of what is play in the media. Now, the fact remains that if you look, you know, especially after Galwan, there's been a lot of interest in going into Chinese sources, understanding what they're saying about India and so on and so forth. The fact remains that, you know, it's not that, you know, the Chinese are completely disinterested and don't really care about India. And yeah, the question of, you know, the labeling of us as the stooges of the West, the Monroeist doctrine, India follows the hegemonic Monroeist doctrine in sort of South Asia, all of that keeps coming up. But the fact is, if you look and draw assessments, there's a lot of scholarship. My colleagues have done it with me, the Institute as well, that from, you know, 2013 to 2018, there's something called 5 volumes of the Blue Book series, which are very important in Chinese strategic thinking. They have sort of highlighted a growing trend of antagonism in Chinese perceptions towards India in general, and a pessimistic outlook regarding the future sort of contours of India-China relations. In fact, Mr. Ranade wrote a piece, I remember, after, there was an article that came out in October 2020 by this gentleman called Hu Shisheng, who was the director of the Institute for South Asian Studies at Kikir, which is the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, who was, arguing as to what were the Chinese motivations for why Galwan happened. And he said, this is, of course, it's not incidental, but the inevitable result of a high-risk, high-yield policy followed by under Prime Minister Modi's administration. So the short point I'm trying to make is that it's not like they don't really care about us or don't think of us as, in fact, they hate to call us peers, but we're certainly seen as strategic rivals in sort of their conceptualization and strategic thinking. That's the first point I wanted to make. Secondly, to circle back to the point you were making initially, that, India should come at it from a moralistic sort of standpoint and oppose Chinese expansionism, and you took the example of Hong Kong, etc. The fact remains, and now let me just, go back a few weeks. Look what happened to Apple Daily in Hong Kong, right? I mean, there's a lot of noise that came out from the West. The Americans came out and said things. But the fact was China was able to prove its power to prevail. And there was very little that the West could actually do in terms of containing that fallout. And I also want to bring in sort of, when you're talking about this Taiwan conversation as well. Now, if you think back a few months ago, there was a lot, especially as a student of international relations, I found that there was an intense debate happening in Australia, for example, on the possibility of war with China over the defense of Taiwan. And, there was the Australian sort of security establishment was gripped in this debate that, there was rhetoric on one side, it's saying that it's a wake-up call for Australia's national security and so on and so forth. But even then, some of the points that came up was that, some analysts wanted this hard-hitting message to go because they thought that Washington, despite its many assurances to Taiwan, was not really willing to confront China, and therefore Australia's defense wonks were unhappy with Biden's positioning on China. So the short point I want to make is that, it's not all very linear. There's a lot of push and pulls going on in terms of how these issues are debated. So it's good to come at it from a point of view saying we need to, as a moralistic stand and, oppose this, etc. But for each country, there are various lines of interest in play before they make and go out and make these declaratory statements. The fact is what is actually happening on the ground. So thanks. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Shruti. We are sort of like nearing our conclusions. I want to start moving towards conclusions. So we've talked for a while about India acting unilaterally. The international consensus is to respect one China, and anything that we do unilaterally could have consequences. Some people think it's high time we do something. We shouldn't be so timid. Others think that it would be immature. But now, putting aside unilateral, what about if we are pulled into doing it? What about others start doing it? So Japan recently stopped including Taiwan in China's map. Australia, as you pointed out, has become more vocal in criticizing China, not just in case of Taiwan, but they've also pointed out, like France, they have called out for investigations around coronavirus origins and all. Again, India has remained completely silent, not looking to get into any kind of meddling with any kind of problems with China. But what if our involvement with Quad and our growing alliance with US, Japan drags us into this? What if they change stance? Would India go along or not? So what do you think if Quad becomes more assertive on Taiwan? Will India join, or India would again, it would take the prudent stance and sort of not align with China? Like we didn't go along when the West and the US were criticizing Hong Kong, for example. You're right, nothing happened, but at least they took a stance on the Hong Kong protests. On Xinjiang, they issued sanctions. India has remained silent. Do you think if there is more assertiveness from Japan's side and Australia and the US, do you think India would join? So let's start with Mr. Puri, and then we'll sort of move into concluding remarks so that we can wrap up in the next 10 minutes.
Thank you, Yajur. Your question starts with another question. What if they do? I haven't seen them doing anything. And frankly speaking, I'm not a great believer in them. For me, it's not Indo-Pacific or Quad that matters, but India matters. And I think what has happened is that we tend to allow this to become more important than us. We are going to be the largest country in the world, a huge market. We need to be the point of interest, especially in the West. We, not these other things, not as a let me say, a tool to help in actions with China. That's fine. That we will do or not do, etc. We'll take a view on that. We need to focus on ourselves. India first. I am very, very clear in my mind on that. And this Quad, etc. Oh, look, I don't want to say anything about it at all. Australia, what happened, Shruti? Then after that, just quiet. A few deals and that's it. And the Japanese, if there's a little bit given to them, they'll go running there. And Yajur, who says that he has lived there, you would know the way Japanese companies and others react. Look, we should understand the realities and where things are. Our time will come, I have no doubt. But right now, our focus must be on building a stronger, economically stronger India. And for that, these things are important that we don't let them get out of hand. No Chinese intrusion in our territories. We need to be careful on that. We need to be strong and resolute. But our focus needs to be to get those things going. And no risky and no, let me say, frittering away unnecessary energy.
So we got to safeguard our interests instead of getting into alliances against China.
Overdoing it.
Thank you. General Asthana?
Yeah, I'll just make few quick points. Firstly, I totally agree. It's India first, and we have to think about India. 1978, India was economically ahead of China in every single economic parameter. We have lost out. That's history. Historically, we have done some mistakes. Whether we need not now split hairs, whether military did it or MEA did it or politicians did it. As a country, we have been reactive. We did not do requisite capacity building, and therefore we find that there are certain reservations in some minds, whereas we certainly feel that the mind must open up, and I totally agree with Mr. Ranade when he says so. The second point is when you went there and you narrated an experience, let me tell you, it is the Chinese media which is feeding them. Their minds are have been worked out. With one single example, I can tell you, today you see China is rattled like hell on Quad. Quad may mean nothing, virtually nothing, as the ambassador was trying to point out. But the difference is that all the other three members in Quad were already NATO allies. The only difference which has happened is India's inclusion into those three countries. And with this one inclusion, China is jumping like hell. So therefore, this is a situation, this is how China treats India. So it's not that, let's not underestimate ourselves. Yes, when I have been to China so many times, and so has everybody else in the panel, they treat you very well and they are very nice to you. There is no doubt about it. I mean, we all know their hospitality is, I mean, we can't even match in their hospitality as far as China is concerned. That's another issue. The next point I want to make out is that China has deliberately, with deliberate policies, has made not only the strategic encroachment, they have made digital encroachment, they have made economic encroachment. It's time of awakening. Yes, Make in India may not be a very successful venture today, but it is an investment for tomorrow. Let people come and make it in India. Let's also learn that technology, and perhaps tomorrow we may be self-reliant, because we need to be self-reliant if we want to do our capacity building. So without capacity building, you can't do. We must buy time, as Ambassador mentioned. Totally agree with him. So with these things, I would say that certainly we have a lot to do. We have a lot to catch up. But at the same time, we also have a lot of strength that we need not cow down to China. We must show our strength and annoyance and our desire and intent to needle them if they needle us beyond a point. Let's set a red line for them in Indian interest. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ranade?
I think there's no debate on the fact that India is first, and that all our policies, all our actions are tailored by furthering, and I use the word furthering, not just safeguarding, our sovereignty and our territorial interests. That is the first point that I would make. The second, if in the process we need to forge partnerships, if in the process we need to acquire certain kinds of technology from wherever it may be, we should go ahead and do it. The third point, I personally do not subscribe to the point of view that we as a country can only do one thing and not anything else. There was an old saying, and I think Bharat and General Asthana would recall when Brezhnev was around, people used to say he can walk and talk at the same time. I think we can do both at the same time. So it's not that while we are building up our economy, we can't do anything else. We can do both. If the army is not capable, they have to be made capable. They have to be asked what to do. They have to think of different things. Even with the limited resources, the army can certainly think of different tactics and different strategies with which they can counter the situation. Today, we are at an impasse at Ladakh. I, frankly, am apprehensive that something more going to happen, particularly after Xi Jinping's visit. But the army also should not allow an impasse. It should keep things on the boil. It should keep them on the back foot, as it were. And I think that's the point the general is making. Finally, I would certainly say that while we are looking at our own interests, etc., the vulnerabilities of, some people like to call it fault lines, that the Chinese have must be, how do I put it, most diplomatically, I'm not a diplomat, you know, should be explored, if I may say, explored in depth. I think people will understand what I mean. And finally, on my concluding point, let not China dictate to us what we can do in our own country. If the Dalai Lama in India wants to host a Thank You India event in Delhi, why should we scrub it? Because the Chinese told you to scrub it. Similarly, why are we hesitant of even meeting the Dalai Lama in public? Our Prime Minister is hesitant of meeting the Dalai Lama in public because the Chinese will get upset. In fact, at a time, we had reached a stage where we were hesitant to even go to Arunachal Pradesh. So things like this we must ignore. We must do exactly what we want to do in our own interest. And as I said, to assert our sovereignty and our territorial integrity. I'll stop there.
So on that point, it just came to my mind. Do you think Indian policy has changed after Galawan? We did not wish the communist CCP centenary celebration. A lot was made out of it. India not wishing them on their 100th anniversary. Do you think there is a change recently in the Indian policy?
I think the change started as soon as the Chinese arrived on our doorstep in May last year.
Okay.
For that also there was thinking, mind you, and let me put that very frankly. There was thinking to change. Some kind of changes were already being contemplated. The Chinese actions in May accelerated it. After Galwan, certainly that was a convenient peg to hang it on. But things are changing, and I am almost sure, certain, that you will see more changes in the next few years.
Thank you, sir. Professor Karnad, now I request you to conclude the debate.
Yes, I think in 2015, I wrote a book called Why India is Not a Great Power, and then in brackets, Yet. And by the way, that yet in bracket was suggested by my American editor, who said it'll increase the sales of the book. But I'm more declaratory. Why India is not a great power. End of the story. Look, it's very curious that
if I may, sir, once again, you also came to our debate where we had a debate on the same topic, and that was very enlightening to hear from you. Why will India become a superpower?
Yeah, and I said very doubtful for the obvious reasons, not that we don't have the resources, but we don't have the political will. This is what nobody has mentioned. It's not the resources, it's not the talent, it's not anything, it's not a wherewithal. It's that we don't have the political will. I cannot understand it 70 years after, the end of the Raj and having been enslaved and all that rest of it. 3 generations have passed, and yet we have inherited that sense of deference to the West, to China. We defer to everybody. I mean, anybody comes around that is slightly bigger, we think someone we can't handle, we end up kowtowing. That said, the point I think is very simple. People here have said about economic development first. That's been our mantra for the last 70 years, starting with Nehru. Let's economically develop first. And then we'll have a military of, that we'll be able to afford big things, we'll do this, we'll do that. We never got to that point. But as I've argued, we don't make the basic things that Deng Xiaoping did in China in terms of having an enabling economic environment. Forget the ideological nonsense. It's the enabling environment that you create. You still haven't done so. And you're still talking about Manmohan Singh as being the acme of Indian reforms. My God, those are only partial reforms. We are now getting back to the kind of license control Raj, whether anybody wants to call it that or not. In real terms, that's what's happening. So what are we talking about? In what universe are we all living when we talk about being an equal of China? Forget equal of China. Try to be an equal of Vietnam, which is coming up so fast, is going to out eclipse you in another 25 years at the present rates of growth. What are we, so ultimately there's no political will. And of course, as no one else is mentioning, there's no vision. There's no vision. Being Vishwa Guru is not a mission. It's not a strategic vision. Civilizational state notions is not a vision. And one last thing about the quadrilateral that people talked about. Look, I've said, and this has been my last book, etc., the quadrilateral is an overblown geostrategic architecture. Why? Because the central pillar is the weak United States. It will never fight China. Let's be very clear about it. It will do everything short of actually fighting China. And they burned their fingers in Korea. And by the way, there are classified materials that I can refer you to from the Pentagon, plans divisions and so on, wherein they said well, we are not going to get into a land war with China. So sure, there, as last week they sent a squadron of F-22s across to Guam from Hawaii, PACOM. Hey, big deal. That's supposed to do what? Frighten China out of their pajamas? I mean, this is a real problem. Symbolic gestures won't do it. And we think, General, that just because joining America is going to help you, I mean, unless we begin to put our, essentially put our military wherewithal where our mouths are, we are going to get nowhere. And in terms of real terms, really, that's why I've said, use your nuclear weapons as a cover, because conventionally you're very inferior, not perhaps in terms of manpower, but in terms of all the other things that go with it, like cyber. I mean, you guys, our military is ready to fight the Second World War very well. Look at our military expenditure priorities, which is what I've been writing about for 30 years, from when I was advisor defense expenditure to the 10th Finance Commission. I mean, what are your expenditure priorities? Who is responsible, General? It's not the government, I'm sorry. It's the services planning staffs. It's the services chiefs. Let's at least put the blame where it's supposed to be, not point fingers at everybody else. So that's it. The very simple point is no vision, no political will. That really should end the game right there, because without that, you can be a big elephant, and then an elephant can be very easily tamed. Remember that. You can be a circus elephant. You can still be big, but you are a circus elephant. You'll jump up and down and stand on a stool because someone makes you do it, because you do not have the will to be a great power. And if you do not have the will to be a great power, you will not be a great power, no matter what quadrilaterals you join or anything else you might do. And finally, just one very last thing, my pet theme, the quadrilateral has to be a modified quadrilateral that I've talked about in my last book, Staggering Forward, which is what? Instead of America, get the Southeast Asian nations in, who are on China's periphery and have most to lose, and have a stake, a strategic and territorial stake in opposing China. Get them in. Let America be what it's always been, an extraterritorial balancer. Don't rely on America. I've spent a third of my life in America. I know Americans very well. Many of my friends have been in governments through several administration at the highest levels. I know what they are. I schooled with them from undergrad level up. I know what they are. If their interests are immediately imperiled, they will do anything to rescue those and protect those interests. They will not go to their own treaty allies' interests, which is what the Japanese now are realizing, which is what the Filipinos discovered many years back when they abrogated their treaty, and which is now being discovered by South Korea. Which is why I said in a 2008 book that all these countries are going to go nuclear, and a very good thing to happen. Let's, ring China with nuclear weapon states and help every country that wants a nuclear weapon to have a nuclear weapon. And let's see how Chinese sweat bricks, because that's the way to do it, because they've done it to us. When I said this, by the way, Jay, you may or may not know this, but we were with the C.V. Ranganathan thing, first 1.5 track. I'd gone there, and the MEA had opposed my being on that trip for obvious reasons. And I said all this then. That was 2001, 2002, Vajpayee's time. And you won't believe me, the C.V. Ranganathan comes to me the evening before and says, Bharat, Chinese love delicacy of expression, So I said, C.V., you go with the delicacy of expression and all that. You use your rhetorical rapiers. I'm going to go with them with a blunt broadsword. And guess what happened? In the plenary session that I was supposed to talk on, when I said all these things, exactly as I've said it here in all my books and so on, to the Chinese then keyed on precisely this. And at the tea break, a general, I can't remember his name, came to me and said, do you think you'll really do this? And I had to literally hide my face and say, well, I don't know. If we do it, we are going to be in big trouble. If we do all the things like merely tit for tatting, you will be in big trouble. And he did not come out and say no and act up. He understood what I was saying. If we arm every state in the periphery, there are more border states on China's periphery who have enmity with China, who have territorial disputes with China, than there are states who have animus vis-a-vis India in our neighborhood. So we have an advantage which we should exploit, and if we do, we'll be in very good stead. Maybe not, as Manjeev would hope, in the manner he would like it to happen, but that's the way forward, I think, to really get something done.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for sharing your varied views and insights on this topic, which is again becoming relevant, and I believe we are likely to hear more about it in the near future. As pointed out by many people in the panel, India needs to have a clear vision and strategy. Thank you all. This was very informational, and we look forward to having you again on our platform. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ajay.
Guys,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.